So hello, my presentation is about my research project about LGBT plus LGBTQIA movement in Poland. And this research project will be published, although in Polish, in a few months, in the book that I prepared. And I hope I will publish something in English for people who do not speak or read in Polish. And the book is about the outcomes of the social movement, on the example of the LGBTQ movement in Poland, LGBT movement. Well, this acronym is always a problem, so forgive me if I change it during my presentation. I'm sure that you know it's usually very different in different publications. So we, as scholars and also activists, may ask the question, so did we achieve anything? Did they achieve anything? Or in another language, we may ask, what are the outcomes of this social movement? So I tried to answer this question during my project. I started to be an activist in 2013, and after some time I decided to study this movement because I realized that many people in the movement ask this question, and I was interested in it. I would name myself a constructivist, so I would say that there is no objective knowledge, there is always situated knowledge, and my knowledge is also situated. This is activist knowledge, but also scholar knowledge in this context. And this was a part of engaged sociology. It's like the part of the critical orientation in sociology, the name that was published by Janusz Mucha in his book about critical orientation in sociology. So we may say that I do my research for these people. They may use it. They don't have to, of course, but they may use it. So I prepared on this, it's me, for example. So I prepared an extensive qualitative project between 2015 and 2016, and before I had some data from the movement. The most important part of the project were interviews with the leaders of the movement. So sometimes these leaders were individuals, sometimes couples. So sometimes the leader is a couple. I had some extra interviews with lesbian groups and informal groups, focus group interview. I had also some data from the movement, like the transcript from the meeting of organizations and some official statements from it. And also my knowledge from the movement, which is important to analyze this data, which is important to understand the context. However, it is problematic when we want to publish this knowledge or use it to show that we know something that was not gathered during, for example, interviews, but I at the same time know it. So what are these outcomes? Of course, I don't have time to present everything that I studied because I have much more information in my book. I will present only some briefs about it. I would name them political, sociocultural, and economical. And when we think about political outcomes, this is something that is mostly interesting for most of activists and for most scholars. So when we think about outcomes, we usually think about political outcomes. We think about legal changes. Activists and scholars too. And we may say that the LGBT movement created themselves as political actor. So activists take part in creating law, and they are an important part of electorate. So politicians speak to LGBT people because they want their votes. The movement took part in creating legislation, so all the legislation about LGBT people, almost all, was prepared by activists. So they wrote it, literally. Those people wrote it, and politicians proposed it. And the most important was, or the last one almost, was Gender Recognition Act about transgender people. That was almost successful. So it was blocked by the president, but it was in the parliament, and it came out of the parliament. There were a lot of proposals about civil partnerships, and the last one this year. And there was a new tone, a new discourse in the movement about same-sex marriage. So after civil partnerships, there was a new goal of same-sex marriage, and none of it, was prepared. Nothing exists about it in the law. There is also the part of homophobic hate crimes. So we have hate crimes in Poland, but they are not about homophobia. They are mostly about race, ethnicity, and religion. So the goal of the movement was to create homophobic hate crimes in Polish legal context, and it didn't work. And there is also this Anti-Discrimination Act, and I have this plus minus because the movement uses it. So there are benefits because of this legal act, who helps to fight discrimination, for example, in the market, but it was forced by the European Union, so it's like our labor code. So we have the protection against discrimination of sexual orientation in labor code, but only because the European Union forced us to have it. Because to be a member of European Union, we have to have it. So it's a little bit complicated overview of it. And we have also those sociocultural outcomes. I usually don't distinguish between social and cultural. From my point of view, it's very similar. So it's important to notice that although activists think about the West, they are very reflective. So it's not the West is great, do all that is in the West. So they are better, and we are backwards, and so on. Many of my respondents were very critical about West countries. It's important to remember about it. So of course, many people changed their biographies. So more and more people came out, they created relationships, they had the opportunity to create transition, medical transition, cultural transition, and so on. So this is the plus. There were some attempts to create systematic aid for people, like creating a safe spaces for LGBT people, like, for example, for homeless teenagers. But the house for these people were created by the grant, and when the funds ended, the place ended too. So there is no systematic aid for LGBT people in Polish context. We may say that the socio-cultural outcome of the movement is that the movement exists. So it still exists. It could be an outcome. The movement created its identity, so it's speaking about equal rights, created discrimination, so created grievance. It's changing public discourse, so we speak about civil partnerships because of the movement, because the movement started speaking about it. And attitudes are changing. However, it's important to mention that we have data only about homosexual people, not about transgender people. And the movement started creating knowledge about LGBT people. So most of reports about LGBT people in Poland are created by activists. We may speak about methodology a lot, but it's hard to do it now. So to present it with one citation, this is from the Diet. The one says, "I remember the times," and the other person, the two, I think, remembers them even better, when we collected every newspaper clipping where anything about non-heteronormative people was written. Imagine something like that now. Of course, internet has changed a lot. Globalization has changed a lot. But you know, and the two, I say that the biggest achievement of the activists, which they made, is that those people who say, "What for is this activism?" And those mythical friends of politicians who don't want civil partnerships, who are feeling good. This is the credit of these activists, that we can go to our own pubs in peace, that we have our own media, let's say in quotation marks, that we may have organization, that this is the credit, that we can demonstrate. And economical outcomes may be about creating a consumer group and diversity management in companies. However, I don't think I have enough time to speak about it now, maybe later. So I speak about outcomes, and I would say that there were a lot of pluses on my slides, and as you could see. However, my respondents mostly said, "We failed. These are not successes." And to quote, "How does the movement work? Above all, inefficiently. And it is, having been active for more than 20 some years already, 30 years soon? Simply after all these changes, there should be at least civil partnerships long before now. So they think they failed. And there is always another goal in the future to achieve. And another part of my presentation, after doing my research, after analyzing it, was to do another step in engaged sociology. And it was a very hard step. So I decided to send my conclusions and my data to my respondents. So when I wrote my book, I sent my book to my respondents and I asked them to read it. Of course, they had the opportunity to read the whole book, but I asked them to read these empirical parts. These were the most important parts for them to read, because of course they are not specialists in social movement theories and so on, and it's quite boring for many people who are not scholars. And most of these people answered, so most of them read it and commented. I sent it between December 2017 and February 2018, so not long ago. And I sent it to movement leaders. The reason for that was to find people who really can comment on it. So they will find time and they have enough knowledge to interpret it, to be at least critical about it, to know more than the person who is in the movement for 1 week. 3 did not manage to comment, 1 person because she was going to be a mother, for example. And comments were mostly positive, however some critical. Some of them asked me for extra anonymizations, so I anonymized my data a lot. Even my reviewers told me that it was too much, maybe. But I knew when I was in the movement that people can identify each other very easily. They have so much knowledge about each other that they don't need the age, they may know the context to know the person who speaks. And most of people commented about specific parts of my book. Most of them focused on citations from themselves. So they were checking their speaking. Some of them asked for more precision. And a few of them commented about campaign against homophobia. And the biggest and the most controversial in the movement, the biggest organization in Poland. So to quote those critical comments, some of them were about my conclusions and individual experience. So for example, you pay attention to negative relations between some organizations, animosities between their members. You write about the deficit of trust in the movement. Maybe it's because of my naivety, maybe of my experience of cooperation with others, but I don't agree with you, with all your theses. Transfusia foundations many times cooperated fruitfully and peacefully with other organizations. So it's like a common critical statement to our work, sociological work. I think that all of us know it already. And a few comments about campaign against homophobia, and mostly about the process of professionalization of this organization, which is very big and financed. So the person who spoke a lot about this organization, and I cited this person, and she said, I completely disagree with the tenor of this statement. I do notice that campaign against homophobia works more like a company, in the sense that the organization engages volunteers to non-paid job, offering them some benefits in return. And a company conducts very good projects, but in a team, which is paid. The tone of this statement is that campaign steals money on bureaucracy, separating itself from the community. It's not the point. Firstly, it's not about bureaucracy, because bureaucracy is imposed by donors. Secondly, campaign still does good things for people, for whom it serves, e.g. LGBT community. It is just in a professional manner, non-engaging LGBT people in building a wide community around the organization. And the third type is the sense of the analysis in the situation that we have now. I can see my statements to be out of date because we have now a completely different situation in Poland. There is no point in splintering into the process of disintegration of campaign against homophobia or someone's mistakes in the face of such an enormous enemy as law and justice. And some positive feedback, supportive, I'd say. So many people just said something very briefly, a very general approval, like you present the goals of LGBT movement in Poland clearly and understandably, I like it very much, or I am impressed by the thoroughness of the characterization of the movement, or your conclusions and observations are as accurate as possible, the description of the situation complete, and anticipations for the future highly probable and overlapping minds, or I am impressed, incredibly interesting for me, I agree with many conclusions, a really amazing reading. Something about specific parts of the book, like I agree, there is a lack of coordination of actions and information exchange in the movement, or I've had similar feelings for a few years. There is and was no continuity of the memory transition, and about campaign against homophobia. Unfortunately, I have to agree. Campaign in the frame of professionalization of actions is becoming a mainly advocacy organization and strongly based on specialists from a given field. They separated themselves from the community and don't benefit from its resources, don't consult actions with LGBTQ community. However, there is no denying their success resulting from this strategy. So that's all for me. Thank you for your attention. If you are interested in my conclusions, my book and my publication, write to me or ask questions. And that's all, I think. Thank you very much for your attention.